Welcome to the Dylan Experience. Today is episode 62. And if you haven't followed and liked the podcast yet, go ahead and do that. I've got a special guest for you today. My guest today is a combat decorated Navy SEAL sniper, but not just any sniper. He was the lead instructor and course manager of the U.S. Navy SEAL sniper course when men like Chris Kyle and Marcus Luttrell were learning their craft. Following his military career, he turned to entrepreneurship and built two brands into eight-figure businesses, while also becoming a New York Times bestselling author of books like The Red Circle, The Killing School, and more recently, a fiction series that includes two books, Cold Fear and Steel Fear. I'm excited to have on the show Brandon Webb. Brandon, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me, Dylan.
It's an honor to have you on because, I actually read both of your books, The Red Circle and Killing School, a decade ago. So it's like when I connected with you on TikTok, it was remarkable that you even responded to me. So I think this is really cool. But for people that don't know who Chris Kyle are and Marcus Luttrell, can you kind of give yourself a short introduction of like, why is the U.S. Navy Sniper School program and everything that came from it so important?
Well, previous to 9/11, we had an okay sniper program. It wasn't great. When I got back from Afghanistan in 2002, I went to work at an advanced sniper training at a sniper cell at training detachment, which is a training command. You have two training commands, one on the West Coast, one on the East Coast. And while working there, I was asked to come help with the pilot course because two master chiefs, really great guys, actually a master chief and a senior chief. We had two schools on the East Coast and West Coast, and they recognized the fact that we need to modernize our sniper program. So they asked me and a few others to augment this pilot course and kind of help make it better. And I went and did that. And then the guy on the West Coast, Bob, said, look, you were great. You had lots of great input. Can you come down and work at the program? And I said, well, I'm about to go to be a BUDS instructor and take some time off. And I always think about that. I try not to look in the past, but you're often in life, you reach these Y's in the road. And what happened if I had just took that cushy BUDS instructor job and just yelled at students all week and worked out? But I ended up going down to the sniper program because I felt that it was the right thing to do. We had just invaded Iraq and we had a lot of guys overseas, and I thought, okay, this is kind of a good thing for me to do, even though I'm giving up in the Navy, we call it shore duty, which is usually you do a 5-year operational tour, then you rotate to more kind of a laid back shore assignment so you could decompress.
Sure.
So make a long answer longer, or a long story longer. To answer your question, the sniper program, we were all in this process of making it world class, and that involved not only the technology, getting rid of, hand sketches and teaching guys how to use computers and build target packages with digital photography and laptops and SATCOMs, that kind of thing. It was, how do we be better instructors? And so we had all these consultants come in, and one of the consultants that really resonated with me was a guy named Lanny Basham, who was an Olympic gold medalist.
Love Lanny Basham.
I talk about him in a lot of my books. And Lanny was big on mental management, and he had developed a program for himself in the 70s before positive psychology was even a thing, because he had really choked at his first Olympic appearance and choked and won silver. But he said the worst thing is, when you're a silver medalist, everyone asks you, the next question out of their mouth is, who won the gold? Yeah. He said it was crazy. So Lanny was instrumental, at least for me. And I ended up coming down to the program. Bob retired, and I ended up becoming the course manager, at the time I was an E6 and it was an E8 billet. So it was a senior chief billet and I was a petty officer first class. I'd just been meritoriously promoted to first class. Then when I was eligible for chief, I think the fact that I was in a job with 2 ranks higher helped me make chief right away too.
Right.
But I incorporate a lot of Lanny's philosophy, including visualization, positive psychology, positive reinforcement, positive reinforcement over negative.
Yep.
And this was a time when Chris Kyle was going through the program. Marcus Luttrell was a student. Both, Chris Kyle, everyone knows, a lot of people know anyway, from American Sniper, and Marcus Luttrell wrote Lone Survivor. And we, through this process, made the program one of the best sniper courses in the world. We ended up consolidating East and West methodologies into one because there was slightly different teaching methods, and we said, look, we need standardization. I talk about this, at least I did several years back, how US law enforcement could use standardization, because typically there's a best way to do it. And everyone should kind of get on that same page, where a lot of the law enforcement departments have totally different tactics and techniques and procedures. It's a training term we use, but our goal is to get on the same page. So we created this incredible sniper program, and the mental aspect of it, we had incredible results. Like, we had a 30% failure rate, meaning 20-ish sniper students would show up and 30% would go home failing. And when we, at least when I on the West Coast put in this mental management program, our graduation rate went up to almost 100%. And the course didn't get easier. If anything, we made it more difficult. But to give you an example, we would positive reinforcement versus negative. So in the past, we would run the course kind of like sink or swim. We'd be really hard on the students verbally. And then we realized, guys, these are already qualified Navy SEALs. We don't need to have this boot camp kind of environment. So rather, and plus, pointing out all the mistakes to a beginner just reinforces those mistakes. So you're programming a student for failure instead of success. So if you see them doing something wrong, like anticipating the recoil, which looks like a flinch on a trigger, you don't want to tell a guy he's flinching, because that's all he's thinking about. And now he's got like a flinch complex. So, and I saw the results instantly. So that, back and tying it all into the mental health aspect, that whole experience, I think, really helped me in my transition. And we could talk about that later, but the sniper program became one of the best in the military, and the US military. And then even in the world, we would get requests from Polish, Danish, military theater commanders would call us, like, what are you guys teaching these snipers? Because they're coming over to Iraq and being loaned out. Like, I think Chris Kyle was even loaned out to the Army and Marine Corps in Iraq, and with devastating results, right? So these people were starting to notice. And then, a few years more into it, I hit total burnout, and I needed to get out of the Navy. Like, my marriage was crumbling. I wasn't there for my kids. I was working 80, 90-hour work weeks at the sniper course, going to the Midwest, because we had a training center in the Midwest that we kind of consolidated on both courses. And so I left in 2006, which the rest of the story from reading the Red Circle. But that's kind of the history of the SEAL sniper program. And I can honestly say it was, for me, one of the best, most rewarding parts of my career. Was, even though it was brutally challenging, and the hours and everything that I put into it, but it was really rewarding. And I'm really glad I made that call, and I'm glad I got out, because it was the right time for me to go.
I'm curious, like, when obviously when you put in the mental management program, because I love Lanny Basham's work and followed it for years. Did you have the conversations with students about the terminal effects of being a sniper, right? Like ending a life. Was that a part of the conversation when you started teaching these guys?
No, we never really had a direct conversation on that. What we did do in the advanced program was take guys. We would have a program called a rural sniper when I was at the advanced sniper training, where we would take guys and hunt. And if you can stalk a buck in the mountains and
Yeah.
and you can kill a human being, like oftentimes humans are way more lazier than the animals are.
That's
um
true.
yeah. But that was part of it. That was that kind of psychological prep. If anyone hadn't pulled the trigger and stopped the beating heart, that was kind of the goal of this rural sniper advanced training, was to do that. But you kind of get, you're conditioned to that conversation from day one. I mean, they talk about it all the time in SEAL training as well.
Sure. And I'm curious, like with the SEALs that you've worked with, obviously you've worked with, Chris Kyle and Mark Luttrell, guys who have done killing. Um, do you kind of recognize guys that are actively building the progression to later on deal with it, right? Like I've been in the military for 15 years. I just actually became a sniper section leader, so I'm leading snipers. And so we're having these conversations day by day. Do you find that there is a perspective that matters in terms of when guys get out, they actually know how to have these conversations of, yes, I've done this and this is how I feel about it?
I don't know, like it's not something I've really thought about, to be honest. I mean, I've thought a lot about the transition and in our own SEAL community. Like when you're in the military and in the teams, the support system is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
When you're out, it's terrible. Like, we have no alumni. It's very dog eat dog. A lot of guys dealing from the SEAL community with big time issues,
Yeah.
multiple issues, whether it's, dealing with trauma from combat, um, being at the top of your, military career one day, and then you're just an average Joe when you're out, right?
Right.
That from being in the military. Um, a lot of guys struggle, and even me running a business, I used to really have a soft spot for hiring vets, and I still do, but I really screen
Yeah.
the probably veterans harder than I do regular employees, which
Not
is
all.
sad to say. But to be honest, my worst, the most, betrayed, and the most drama, and the fact that, I point to a guy that worked for me. I work for him overseas on a contract basis, but this guy's a former Marine and ended up getting hooked on drugs. I tried to get him in a program, put him on 2 months severance. As soon as that severance ended, he just went on social media and just trash talked me. And then 6 months later, he's dead of an overdose. So it's like,
Yeah.
I can point to probably that's the worst case, but at least 2 or 3 more that were just brutal cases of kind of veterans gone wild,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term. But it really hurts, when you're trying to like do something good,
Right.
and then somebody betrays you like that. But back to when I realized, okay, these are the signs and I just need to avoid these kind of approaches. But I always think about, why doesn't the SEAL community do a better job really creating an alumni on the outside and adding some professionalism? Because it's sad, to see grown men act like children on social media, and then
Yeah.
to have all these kind of younger kids following them on social media, and they're like, oh, why would this guy say this? And it's a shame. It makes all of us look really bad.
Yeah.
But those are the kind of things that I've thought about, like, why why doesn't the community do a better job helping guys transition? And the mental health is a big part of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to go back to what you said, like not all veterans, and I should say not all military members are heroes in
Yeah.
some regards. And I don't want to trash talk the military or people that join. There's so much selflessness in making that choice, but at the same time, we're also talking about people that are more or less running away from what they have been through. You know, a lot of people that come to the military are traumatized in childhood and choose the military because it's a place of connection. That's certainly what I did. I lost my dad to suicide at 6 years old, and I was trying to die when I joined the military. And so I've since changed that, and through a lot of effort and a lot of work, no thanks to the military in many regards, uh, I've changed that through my own effort. But a lot of people don't even recognize that they've been through trauma in the military. Like they actively assert themselves as, you know, the suffer in silence type, and that's the most effective way for me to live life. And so like it's, you know, as a business owner myself and kind of thinking about how I can work with veterans, it's hard because exactly what you said is some veterans aren't looking to, you know, overcome their problems. They're looking for, you know, a way to kind of work around their problems and always kind of let them sit in the background. So yeah, I mean, I don't think a lot of people look at the military and say, "Wow, there's a lot of fucked up people there," you know, like
Yeah.
because there is, you know, and
Yeah.
I think
I
now,
I would say too, it's tough because I mean, look, the military is a massive organization. I don't even know what the numbers are off the top of my head, but millions of people. It's like any large organization, you're going to have a pretty, pretty good mix of folks, and a lot of those folks have issues, right? Just like the regular workforce. And it's sad because living, I spent 8 years in New York City, and that's in that city generally. I love New York, but there's a lot of bias towards military. They think everybody in the military is stupid. They think, and I'm
yeah,
generalizing, but this is what I've seen. They think, there's a low level of intelligence and that everybody is like a wildly, supporting the Republican Party. And,
yeah,
it's just, they have these like inherent biases, which kind of blew my mind. And you see it a lot on social media too. We had our software Instagram account just canceled one day, like deleted, no recourse whatsoever,
wow,
because we were like military guys. And we used to spend $1 million a month on Facebook ads, and we
yeah,
would get ads. I remember we ran a Veterans Day campaign for the Glenn Doherty Foundation, and they canceled our entire ad campaign for Veterans Day because they said you're not authorized to do political ads. If you're donating to a military charity, you're considered a political activist. I was like, are you
wow,
crazy? So just like all this crazy shit that I've seen, and false kind of the false judgment that gets put on you for just being a veteran. And then, there's like legitimate problems too, which makes it even harder. But yeah, don't get me started on the VA healthcare system
yeah.
also. But it's a shame. Like we really owe it to the veterans in transition, not to victimize them, but to help them help themselves. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a friend of mine put it to me a long time ago when I did an interview with him. Uh, you live your life and you get all sorts of shit that happens in your life, and then all of a sudden you come out of it and join the military, and the military doesn't pour in, love, connection, happiness, right? It pours in more shit and it stirs the pot. And I think if the VA or anyone that tries to help veterans does anything, it's help veterans look back and understand how, how their beginning led them to the military, and then how the military then affected them. PTSD is such a buzzword around the military, but in many ways it's the wrong they look at the wrong time frame. Oftentimes PTSD is centralized around, okay, you went to war, but how many people have had trauma before they even joined the military, and then how did that lead into how they dealt with it at war? So it's always a very interesting conversation to have with people who are like, I want to help veterans. Well, do you even understand how to help veterans and where that starts? But
Yeah.
I'm curious. You spoke about Glenn Doherty, and for those that don't know, Glenn Doherty is he was a contractor at the time, correct?
Yeah, he was working as a contractor for the CIA under the
Yep.
GRS program,
So
the global response stuff.
he was a contractor during what happened in Libya, correct? Libya,
Yeah,
um,
Benghazi.
Benghazi, and so he obviously lost his life during that time, and he's a very good friend of yours. Do you mind kind of talking about one, your relationship to him, and then also like what it was like to kind of work through and process that loss and that grief?
Sure. Glenn and I met in SEAL tactical training. He was a support corpsman, and then we ended up doing our first platoon together at SEAL Team 3 and Gulf Platoon, and just hit it off. We both love the outdoors, surfing, skiing. Glenn at one point was trying to become a professional skier in Salt Lake. But we just kind of hit it off, and Glenn was just one of those people. I can think of maybe a handful of people I've met in life where there's just like the character traits, add up to this person that I can honestly had never heard anyone say a bad thing about Glenn, and that's very rare
Yeah.
to have somebody like that with that kind of personality where everybody loves this guy, and I was one of them, and we're both pilots as well. Glenn got me. I always been into flying, but I remember we did a trip out to the sniper range in where was it? Coalinga, California. They have a big Coalinga Rifle Club in the central California Valley, and we'd taken a Cessna out there, and Glenn had rented from the flying club. And I remember on the way back, he's like, "Hey, do you want to take off?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Well, here, I'll just walk you through it." So I'm like sitting there, and I remember pulling back on the yoke, and the plane took off, and I was like, "Wow, this is
I'm hooked.
incredible." 2 months later, I have my pilot's license, so I was hooked. But Glenn was, we were close. He was close to my family. When I got divorced, I was a pilot. I would grab a flying club plane, and Glenn and I'd fly up and bring the kids back to San Diego. So they were like, he was Uncle Glenn to my kids. And then, we'd both gotten out. He got out, I think, a year or two before me, out of the Navy. And then I got out, and we were involved in a couple different startup businesses together, and just trying to sort our way forward on the outside, and still have this beautiful friendship. And then it's the classic conversation. I remember he had done a rotation to Benghazi, and we were having beers in his backyard in Encinitas, California, and he's like, "Yeah, I could have went to Israel, which is a really cush assignment, Tel Aviv, but he felt an obligation to go back to Libya because he knew it was kind of a mess, and he had experience there. And the guys were saying, 'Hey, come back here. We'd really could use your help and experience.'" So, and this was supposed to be, regardless of location, it was supposed to be his last deployment, because he had kind of saved up enough and was ready to kind of do something else with his life. Which is just the tragic story you hear. So he deployed, and he was in Libya, and when the attack happened on the Ambassador Stevens, and even though Benghazi is not the capital of Libya, I believe Tripoli is, but Benghazi was where the main power base was, all these big powerful militias, and that's why the ambassador, the CIA, and JSOC were all interested in Benghazi for a number of different reasons. Then, but Glenn arrived in country, the attack on the State Department compound happened, and then him and a couple guys from Delta, I think they were Delta guys, they bribed a pilot to fly him up to Libya, or fly him up to Benghazi. It was like a quick flight, but they ran towards the sound of gunfire to help. And really, to put it in perspective, I think the two tier 1 guys had either they had access to a drone or they had a portable drone, but that drone was really critical because they didn't have a lot of air assets overhead. And that drone, actually, to give people an idea of what happened, so basically it was a mansion with a wall. It wasn't even a secured compound that the State Department was occupying. And the State Department guys and the contractors that were supporting Ambassador Stevens were basically running up the security concerns for months up the flagpole, right? There's like, look, we don't have enough support. This is sketchy.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of weeks prior, the British ambassador took an RPG round directly through his vehicle. The warhead didn't spin enough to arm, so it went straight through. Jeez. So the British pulled out. Americans are like, the American State Department guys are like, we need support, or we need to get out of here. Then they got overrun, and they burned the compound down, and Ambassador suffocated with smoke inhalation and died. But they called for help, and the CIA compound was about a few clicks away. And originally the chief of the CIA base said, no, we can't help. And Ty Woods, which was featured in that movie 13 Hours and the book, Ty said, no, we're going. He disobeyed direct orders to go rescue everybody and got everybody out of that compound with the exception of the ambassadors, like saved everyone's lives. They consolidate back to the CIA base. Then Glenn and the other guys show up, and they got the drones, the drone overhead, and they saw this kind of mob figure out that they consolidated on the CIA compound, and then through the drone footage saw they were going to get overrun. So they decided to evacuate. And then right before that, they started launching mortars into the CIA compound, and Glenn took a direct hit, like mortar hit on the roof. He was on the rooftop with Ty Woods and died instantly. But yeah, amazing guy. Really, for me, one of my closest friends. It was tough, my kids at the time, my son was probably 9, 10, and him and his brother and sister are watching it all on TV, crying because they saw pictures of Uncle Glenn, on the TV. For me, it was really tough because I remember I had just landed in San Diego. I took the shuttle to the parking lot, and all his friends were asking me, is Glenn okay? Is Glenn okay? All his civilian friends. And I said, look, I saw in the news, it's the State Department. Glenn doesn't work for the State Department. He should be fine. And then I texted one of my buddies that worked at the agency, and then he sent me a text, call you right back. So he called me and told me before it broke on the news anywhere that Glenn had died. And it was tough because the next phone call I called his other really close friend, Sean, who was living with him at the time. They were roommates. And I said, Sean, you're going to get a knock at the door, and this is tough for you to hear, but this is what happened. And he's like, I don't want to believe you. He's like, but I hear it in your voice. He's like, because I probably cried 15, 20 minutes by myself before I could even call Sean. I was pretty devastated. And Sean called me back like 10 minutes later. He's like, I got the knock. Can you please come to the house? And so I helped, Sean and the family deal with the media for the next 3 or 4 weeks, which is pretty intense because it was during the second term election of Obama. So it was highly politicized, the whole thing. But back to your point on the trauma side, I think I had lost a few friends over the years. And I remember a year I was living in Point Loma, and I could have probably went to a funeral once a month, and it was just too much. I just pushed it aside. I said, I got my family. I don't need to go cry at some funeral, every month. These guys will understand. I'm doing a job. I'm just going to spend time with my family and not deal with this. But when Glenn died, couldn't avoid it. Like it was something I had to face. I had to deal with the whole thing. And I think like the wave of emotion from all the other loss, it really hit me. And it was tough. I had a really tough time dealing with it. I didn't even recognize it until I had to start having problems with I was in a long-term relationship with my girlfriend at the time, and she was getting really frustrated. She was very supportive at first, but then, as the year went on, started to get really impatient.
Yeah.
And I was probably really hard to be around. And yeah, I just kind of had to deal with it. I talked to a psychologist, which was super helpful. Same woman that helped my wife and I through our divorce, and she was an amazing psychologist. That really helped. And then I think falling back on my mental management training and seeing it, seeing how it would work when we implemented it in the sniper school. I knew this stuff worked. So I said, you know what, I just got to really think about, the positives that kind of can come out of this, and I was fucking angry, man. Cause the other thing that really, the two things that really, really disturbed me was one, his ex-girlfriend had totally flipped the script and started telling his mom that she was they were engaged to be married, which is all fabricated. And she had like tried to make a pass at me and all his friends while we were like at the house dealing with the media and we're all grieving. And she was a mess, but again, went around and just started, when I refused her advances, went around to everybody who would listen and just started trash talking me. It was like, and I'm like, Jesus, now I got this loose cannon out there. Yeah. Talking to all these widows, getting them all riled up against me. And I'm like, what the hell did I do? But I was one of the SEALs that was out having some success. The Red Circle was out. And having to deal with all this stuff. So that just added to my own stress and issues. Then, yeah, I had and a couple jealous teammates also kind of coming out of the woodworks. And then on top of that, Glenn, the CIA makes everybody sign an insurance policy for a minimum of $1 million. And it was mandatory. But in the little fine print, it says if you have no spouse or dependents, the policy won't pay. So Glenn is paying for this policy that will never pay out because he didn't have a wife or kids. And so after his family is, paraded around the White House and on television, and the Secretary of State at the time, Hillary Clinton, was like, oh, your son's a hero. We're going to take care of him. Anything you need. Well, after that press moment had passed, family got nothing. Like the mom is stressed in Boston. His mom, Barbara, is an amazing lady. She's like, guys, I don't know how to pay for the funeral. There's like $50,000 of bills. And so me and his friends had to pitch in and pay for that. And I'm like, what do you mean? There's no death benefit, no insurance policy paying. And then we found that out. But the benefit of that was that we pressured the agency to do the right thing. We said, look, and Sean, his friend, was really instrumental in this. But he said to Brennan, Brennan's office, like they're in Director Brennan's office in DC. And so, look, I don't care what the fine print says. What right is right and wrong is wrong. And so they got back paid, I think, over 300 contractors back to the 80s embassy bombing in Beirut, wow. Lebanon. They got all these families paid out. I think they made a $500,000 payment to each family. So there was a silver lining, but that was a tough one for me. And for me, it made me realize I have to deal with my own issues and grief, which I did deal with, but also look at the positive, right? Like I knew Glenn, the last thing he would want is for us to sit around feeling sorry for ourselves. And the guy even put in his will, he's like, I don't want a funeral. The only reason we did the funeral because his mom really wanted a funeral in Boston.
Yeah.
But Glenn was like, I don't want any funeral. I want to be cremated. And he put aside $50,000 for us to have a big party, which we did. We rented the Del Mar Fairgrounds, and it must have 1,000 people must have showed up. Like, that was humbling for me to see so many people show up and feel the same way about Glenn that I did. But yeah, so I just focused on, okay, I got to look at the positive here. And that's why I wrote Among Heroes. Like, Among Heroes was kind of, I was thinking of a way, how do I honor my teammates that served and died and would never tell their story, but had these amazing stories and were amazing people themselves. And I said, how can I honor them? And then in a way that isn't a sad book, right? And I think, the beauty of Among Heroes is it profiles these different friends of mine that I serve with, but it tells their story in a very positive way. And there's takeaways, like the same way I took away, wow, Glenn is able to maintain such a large group of friends, but he worked tirelessly to do that. I remember traveling in a military van and he'd be on his little green notebook, flipping through it and calling friends, his friend Elf in Utah, from Sean in Salt Lake. He just kept calling these people all the time, like checking in, maintaining these friendships. Because someone told me, my friend John Bush, he's like, to have good friends, you got to be a good friend. And I think that's in any relationship. But yeah, that's my Glenn story. And it was tough because we had lots of plans together, and it's tough to, those holes are really hard to fill in your life, as having been in the military. But for me also, I really noticed part of my transition was not being around veterans. I started surrounding myself with people in the business community. I joined the Entrepreneurs Organization. Then I joined a group called YPO. Then I went back to school. I went to Harvard Business School and made an amazing group of friends through that experience, and have really worked hard to kind of cultivate my close-knit circle. And look, I get criticized. I know it. I hear it all the time from the other, especially the SEALs, right? But other military guys, Brandon's too good for us. No, that's not it. It's I just, time is finite. I spend my time with my kids, my family, and my close friends. And, that's just it. You are who you hang out with, and you really have to, cultivate those circles. And I'm very careful of letting any cancer agents inside those circles. And because I've dealt with it to my detriment, almost ruined my second business because of that guy we talked about, who I had hired with the drug problem. He had over ordered the total of $2 million of product for the business I was running, and we couldn't move the product. And then the pandemic hit. It was a shit show. So
was that Crate Club?
Yeah, that was Crate Club. And it's one of the reasons I had to sell the business.
Oh, that's crazy. No, it
real consequences.
Right. It makes complete sense. Like when your identity is only I'm a veteran, and you surround yourself with a bunch of people who the only identity I have is a veteran, you very much isolate yourself, and you put yourself on an island towards everyone else in society and say, all of these people have problems, when you don't really realize that you've got problems too, and every human on the planet has problems. So it absolutely makes sense to kind of take yourself out of that environment and look for a new identity to kind of shape yourself all around. I think it's a remarkable skill, and I know there has been criticism of you, and I think that's probably a good thing, right? Because when you look at criticism of yourself, one, I know, just by talking to you, you're not like, that's bullshit. No, you're probably like, that might be true, but I don't think people really look at it the way that I've had to deal with it, right? You're the only person that knows yourself like all of these people are always looking from the outside of the glass, and they never really hear what's going on in your head and what you're doing, and behind the scenes. So no, I think that's a remarkably healthy place to be for yourself, and I'm happy for you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to keep you much longer, but I asked the same question to everybody at the end. So hopefully you can give me a great answer here. If there was one message that you could leave the world, Brandon, what would that be?
Um, I'm gonna steal a quote from Elon Musk. I listened to probably one of my favorite interviews on Rogan, where Musk was on, and the ironic thing was he got so dogpiled from smoking that he said, look, I don't smoke marijuana, it's not my thing, but he did it anyway. I'm like, God, the guy's a cool guy. He's basically fuck it, like took a toke off the joint. And then he ended the interview, and Rogan asked him a similar question, and he said the world needs more kindness, which I find ironic, which I totally agree with, and that would be my message. The world needs more kindness, because I truly think it does. And then to see like the backlash and hate and that was thrown to Elon's way after that episode, just
Ironic.
for sparking up a doobie, I'm like, Jesus Christ, like this guy can't get a break. And I would say the same thing, because I look at recently, look, I'm a fan of Kanye's music. The guy clearly has mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like this cancel culture is just coming down on him right now, right? Just as an example of how our society is so fickle.
Yeah.
And everyone's like just shitting all over this guy. And I'm like, the guy's got, I think, I don't know his medical history, but I've heard he has bipolar syndrome. And that's, I've dated somebody with that, and the mood swings and crazy stuff is wild. And I'm like, where's the compassion? Like, look,
right.
The stuff that he's said, yeah, I don't agree with it at all, but I can recognize this is a guy that's hurting. And it's like, can't we just be a little bit more nice to each other?
Yeah.
Like try and understand, as opposed to just, it's like, okay, we're just shifting fire, right?
Right.
Just machine guns on Kanye right now.
If you don't know him, just shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
Like like my father had bipolar, or was potentially about to be diagnosed with it. And then obviously the day he was supposed to be diagnosed, he ended his life. And so like I've always looked at that. I know nothing about my father relatively. I know him very little, and the only relatable experience I've ever had that kind of helped me in any way relate to him was my own suicide attempt in 2015. And that like kind of brought me to a point of understanding even any kind of, potential for that, of what it might have felt like for him. And I was so humbled at the time when that happened, that a lot of things changed. And I've since, done so much work to get here. I've built a social media platform, I suppose. I've written a book. I've built a business off of trying to help people and provide that kindness in many ways of what you're talking about. And I would even go a step further and say maybe less kindness and more empathy, where we step into people and say, what do I think it would feel like to be this? And rather than say, what do I think it would feel like? Why don't I just ask you, like, Brandon, what would it feel like? And to just take the time to even allow people to express themselves and to speak. I really think that in many ways, if my father had been given that opportunity, he would still be here, right? If he had the opportunity to talk to me how I am now, I think he'd be alive, because I think I give people in many ways the ability to just sit and be themselves and express themselves and talk about the things that they need to talk about, not just what they think should be talked about.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I think it's something that is really missing, especially in America, is that ability to listen, like stop screaming, stop thinking about yourself. Like, let's just take a time out and really take time to like understand where this other person's coming from, why they feel this way, why they say these things. I think, America for sure would be a lot better place if we started doing that.
Did you ever think that you'd be having a conversation between two snipers about compassion and empathy and kindness?
No, no.
When you first started?
Yeah, even like if you had said I was going to be a writer and a business owner and own a media company back in 2006, I would have thought you were crazy.
Yeah.
But such is life.
And if you told me I'd be alive right now in 2006, I'd call you crazy. That's the remarkable part about life, is that we get dealt all sorts of surprising things. But
Yeah, well,
Brandon,
it sounds like you're doing good work, so keep
absolutely.
it up, man.
I think we're both trying to, at least.
Yeah.
Brandon, I want to thank you again, and for anyone that's listening to this, please go check out Brandon. I love all of his books. I haven't read Among Heroes, but I think I'm going to pick it up now. Please go check out Brandon. The link will be in the description. And I just want to thank you for taking time with me, and we'll catch you next time on the Dylan Experience.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan.